My fiancée said, "Figure it out. I'm not your mother," when I asked for help after losing my job. 2 months later, she demanded I pay for her $30,000 dream wedding with money I didn't have. I refused, walked away on the wedding day without a word, and she was forced to figure it out alone when her backup guy ghosted her after the embarrassment. I turned 34 that spring. We lived in a cramped second-floor apartment in Ohio, the kind of place where the walls held more memories than square footage. Rachel and I had been together 3 years. We were planning a life that felt real. The layoff came in a short email. Downsizing. Position eliminated. I read it twice at my desk before the words settled into anything that felt like meaning. It was abrupt, but not unfair. The company needed to cut costs. I left my badge in a drawer and walked home thinking about the logistics, savings, unemployment, who I could call for a temp shift. It felt manageable. I had always been practical. When I told Rachel that evening, I expected a quiet moment, maybe a hug. Instead, she watched me from the couch while scrolling on her phone. Her face didn't change. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked without looking up. "I'll start applying tomorrow," I said. "I might need some help with the bills for a month or two, until I get back on my feet." She set her phone down with a small, annoyed sound and said it like it was the last thing she wanted to give me. "Figure it out, Jason. I'm not your mother." That line hit harder than the email had. It wasn't the words alone. It was the lightness with which she dismissed what I'd just gone through. There was no anger, no concern, only impatience. I offered a nervous laugh, hoping we were both pretending. She didn't join in. After that night, the apartment changed. Conversations that used to be easy now had small barbs under them. Cooking became an exercise in criticism. Too salty, too bland. When I spent hours sending applications, she made jokes about me still being on the bench. The tone in her voice clipped at me the way a cold draft clips a poorly sealed window. What surprised me most was how quickly her plans moved ahead without me. Where we once talked about a future together, she started talking about details as if they were facts. She wanted a big wedding, flowers, a formal venue, a dress that made her eyes shine. She posted inspiration boards and tagged vendors on her stories. She'd smile at the pictures and say, "This is what I want." I tried to remind her gently that finances were tight. She brushed it off. "You'll find something soon," she told me. "Besides, this is my dream wedding. I'm not compromising on it." Hearing the word dream felt strange. Weddings are promises, I thought, something you build together. Her insistence made me uneasy. It felt like a list of items to check off, not a shared decision. 2 months passed in a small, steady blur. I took odd jobs to stretch my savings and sent out applications every morning. I did everything I could to stay afloat and to keep my head clear. The anxiety was a low, constant hum. I did not want pity. I wanted a partner. One evening, Rachel walked in beaming like she'd just won something. "I booked the venue," she announced. I looked up, startled. "You what? How? Those places cost." She waved me off. "Relax. They asked for a deposit. You'll pay the rest once you're working again." Her ease made me feel exposed, like someone had left a lamp on and everyone could see the empty corners I was hiding. "I don't have the money," I said. I thought the answer would make her pause, maybe apologize. She folded her arms and said, with the same blunt tone she used 2 months ago, "You're supposed to figure it out. I'm not your mother." It wasn't a demand so much as a verdict. I sat there, the room somehow louder without any music. I watched her turn back to her phone and felt something inside me settle into a very simple truth. She wasn't beside me in the hard parts. She expected me to be the one to fix everything, and when I couldn't, she made a boundary out of refusal. I didn't storm out or shout. I put down my cup, rubbed both hands over my face, and walked into the bedroom like someone moving through a fog. That night, I lay awake cataloging options and thinking about what it meant when the person you love refuses to hold you when the floor gives way. From that night on, something changed. The closeness we once had was replaced by sharp little jabs and silences that stretched too long. Rachel's patience with me seemed to shrink by the day. If I cooked dinner, she'd push her plate forward after one bite and complain the pasta was bland. If I mentioned an interview, she'd smirk and say, "Still unemployed, huh?" as if it were a running joke. She stopped treating me like a partner and more like a burden she wanted to shake off. What stung the most was the timing. I was applying everywhere, chasing leads, trying to keep my head steady. Meanwhile, Rachel's focus wasn't on building stability with me. It was locked on our wedding. She poured hours into browsing designer dresses, posting Pinterest boards, and calling venues. She had magazines spread out on the coffee table while I hunched over my laptop, rewriting my resume. One night, I told her softly, "Money's tight right now. Maybe we should keep things simple." She didn't even look up from her phone. "You'll find something soon. Besides, this is my dream wedding. I'm not compromising on it." That word again, dream. It wasn't our dream. It was hers alone. I kept my mouth shut, but inside, I felt something sour building. 2 months slipped by this way. I was picking up shifts wherever I could, moving boxes, temp office work, just to cover groceries and keep the lights on. My savings were nearly drained, and the weight of rejection emails piled up like unopened mail. Through it all, Rachel stayed fixated on wedding details. Then one evening, she came home almost glowing. She dropped her purse on the counter and announced, "I booked the venue." I set down the stack of applications I had been filling out. "You booked it? Rachel, how? Those places cost thousands." She cut me off with a flick of her hand. "Relax. They only wanted a deposit. You'll cover the rest once you're working again." The casualness in her voice knocked the air out of me. She had signed contracts, without talking to me, on the assumption that money would just appear. I shook my head slowly. "I don't have the money." Her face darkened. "Jason, this isn't about money. It's about commitment." Her tone was sharp, rehearsed almost, as if she had been waiting to deliver that line. She crossed her arms and stared down at me like a teacher scolding a student. I stayed quiet, but inside I was boiling. How had we gone from partners planning a future to this? To her treating me like a bank account with legs? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow of her phone lighting up the room as she scrolled through Instagram. Every picture she saved, flowers, gowns, chandeliers, felt like another reminder that she wanted the spectacle, not the partnership. It was then that the memory of her first reaction hit me again. That night she told me to figure it out. It hadn't been a slip. It was who she was when things got tough. I didn't say anything out loud. Not yet. But the thought that repeated itself in my head was simple and heavy. If she couldn't stand beside me in the hard times, how could she be my wife in the years ahead? Rachel's face tightened when I told her I didn't have the money. The light in her eyes vanished, replaced by something harder. "Jason," she said slowly, as if I was the one missing the point. "This isn't about money. It's about commitment. Real men take care of their fiancés. If you really loved me, you'd make it happen." The words landed like stones. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a test I hadn't even agreed to take. In her eyes, my worth wasn't in who I was, but in how much I could hand over. I sat back, stunned. I wanted to argue, to remind her how many nights I'd stayed up rewriting applications, how many mornings I'd gone out for temp work just to keep us above water. But instead, I sat there in silence, staring at the table. Something inside me shifted that night. For weeks, I'd been walking around with this heavy feeling of failure, convincing myself I wasn't enough. But hearing Rachel put it in such clear terms, real men, commitment, make it happen, it was like a curtain dropped. She didn't see me as her partner. She saw me as a provider, a walking wallet. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out of the kitchen. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, and let the weight of it sink in. The woman I had been planning to marry, the woman I thought would stand with me in the rough patches, had made her position clear. If I couldn't fund her fantasy, I wasn't worth standing beside. That night, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. She wanted me to figure it out. Fine, I would, but not for her. For myself. I didn't end the engagement right then. Instead, I played along. I answered her questions about the wedding with vague nods and let her believe I was still in. All the while, I was preparing an exit. I picked up more odd jobs, saved what little I could, and lined up a place to stay with a buddy across town if I needed it. By the 3rd month after my layoff, things started to shift. I landed a stable job, not glamorous, but steady. It gave me something I hadn't felt in months: control. My shoulders felt lighter walking into work each morning. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but at least I was building something again. Rachel noticed, but not in the way I hoped. She didn't ask how the new job was going or if I felt better. She wanted to know how soon I'd be ready to pay off deposits, how much of my first paycheck I could put toward catering, and whether we should upgrade the venue package. The more I rebuilt myself, the more she pressed for spectacle. She wanted a bigger guest list, fancier food, more decorations. The wedding was no longer a promise between two people. It was a stage she needed to shine on. One evening, I tried to be reasonable. We were sitting at the dining table, and I said gently, "Maybe we could scale back. Something smaller, more intimate. We don't need to impress anyone." Her fork clattered against her plate. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. "I don't want a small wedding, Jason. This is my once-in-a-lifetime moment. My friends had their dream weddings. I refuse to be the one with a cheap backyard ceremony." The word cheap rolled off her tongue with disgust, and it cut deeper than I expected. She wasn't talking about the two of us, about love, or starting a life together. She was talking about appearances, about how she'd be seen. I sat there in silence, pushing food around my plate, and felt the distance between us grow wider by the second. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of tension. Rachel grew more demanding, more fixated on every detail, while I pulled myself through workdays and tried to keep the bills in order. It wasn't that I didn't care about the future, I did. I wanted stability, a home, something solid we could build together. But Rachel didn't want solid. She wanted extravagant. I kept suggesting compromises. Fewer guests, a simpler menu, a smaller venue. Each time, her face would tighten like I'd suggested canceling the whole thing. One night, after another long day, I tried again. Rachel, maybe we could keep this simple. Just the people who matter most. Something meaningful. She set her glass down hard enough to rattle. I don't want a small wedding, Jason. This is my once-in-a-lifetime moment. My friends had their dream weddings, and I refused to be the one with some cheap backyard ceremony. Her tone lingered in the air long after she left the room. Cheap. That's what she thought of a wedding built on love instead of spectacle. I sat there alone at the table, staring at the plates we couldn't afford to replace, and realized she wasn't worried about us. She was worried about appearances. The final crack came a week before the wedding. Rachel stormed into the living room, a folder of bills clutched in her hand. She slapped one down in front of me. The florist is demanding the rest of the payment. You need to transfer $5,000 by tomorrow. I blinked at the number on the page. Rachel, I told you, I don't have that kind of money. You signed these contracts without asking me. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. You're supposed to be my fiancé. Real men step up. Stop making excuses and figure it out. There it was again, figure it out. The same words she'd thrown at me the night I lost my job. The words that had hung in the back of my mind like a curse. Only this time, it wasn't about dismissing my struggles. It was about demanding I bankroll her fantasy. I sat back on the couch, exhausted. I wanted to remind her of every late night I'd spent piecing our lives back together, of every shift I'd taken just to keep food on the table. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want me. She wanted a provider, someone to make her look good while she lived her dream. That night, as she stomped off to bed, I stayed in the living room, staring at the quiet glow of the lamp. For months, I'd been trying to convince myself this was just stress, that once the dust settled we'd find our way back to each other. But sitting there in that silence, I finally admitted the truth. Rachel wasn't my partner. She was an anchor dragging me down. I didn't pack a bag right then. I didn't storm out or make a scene. Instead, I sat with the decision, calm and steady. I wasn't going to save a wedding that felt like a performance instead of a promise. I wasn't going to let myself be bullied into debt just so Rachel could parade herself in front of her friends. I was done figuring it out for her. The plan formed quietly in my head. I'd step aside and let her face the reality she'd been ignoring. The wedding date loomed, but in my mind, the answer was already clear. That night after the florist bill, I knew what I had to do. There was no yelling, no long speech. Just a quiet decision. I wasn't going to bail her out. I wasn't going to save a wedding that had turned into a performance. Over the next few days, I moved slowly, carefully. I packed a small bag with the essentials, clothes, toiletries, the things I couldn't live without, and left them at my buddy's apartment across town. I kept up appearances around Rachel, answering her questions with short replies, nodding when she talked about cake tastings or flower arrangements. She didn't notice the distance. Or maybe she didn't care. The wedding day came faster than I expected. I woke up early, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at her sleeping beside me. She looked peaceful, the weight of reality still hidden under layers of makeup plans and fantasies. I slipped out of the apartment without a word. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't leave a note. I simply stepped out of the role she had written for me. Later that day, the chaos unfolded, though I wasn't there to see it. Friends called to tell me what happened, their voices laced with disbelief. Guests sat awkwardly in their chairs, murmuring, waiting for the ceremony to start. Whispers grew louder. Where's the groom? Rachel stalled, pacing back and forth in her dress, trying to buy time. Her family begged her to explain, but she couldn't. Hours passed, and it became impossible to hide the truth. I wasn't coming. The so-called dream wedding collapsed in real time, in front of everyone. The venue demanded their balance in full. The vendors refused refunds. Her parents, humiliated and furious, refused to cover the debts she had racked up. What should have been her perfect moment turned into a public unraveling. And then came the twist. Through mutual friends, I learned that Rachel hadn't just been leaning on me for money. She had been talking to another man quietly in the background, hedging her bets. Maybe she thought he'd step in if I failed. Maybe she thought she'd keep her options open. But when the day fell apart, so did his interest. The moment he realized she wasn't offering him a glamorous future, just a pile of unpaid bills and drama, he cut ties. No explanation, just silence. I pictured her standing there, abandoned by the person she thought might replace me, facing a room full of people expecting a celebration. She had gambled everything on appearances, and the mask finally slipped. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't send a message. I didn't need to. The silence spoke for itself. That night, while her world crumbled, I sat on my buddy's couch, eating takeout, the TV humming softly in the background. It was the calmest I had felt in months. Not because I enjoyed her downfall, but because I finally let go of a weight I should have set down long ago. Rachel had told me to figure it out. And I had, just not in the way she expected. News of the failed wedding spread fast. In a small town, you don't get to keep secrets for long, especially not when dozens of guests walk away whispering about what just happened. Within a day, it was all over social media. Pictures of guests still sitting at decorated tables, captions about the groom who never showed. Rachel tried to control the story. She posted a long caption about being betrayed and false promises, but the comments told a different story. People had been there. They'd seen her stalling, seen her snapping at vendors, seen the panic written on her face as the hours ticked by. The sympathy she expected didn't come. Instead, people asked hard questions. Why had she signed contracts she couldn't pay for? Why hadn't she scaled back when she knew things were tight? Behind closed doors, things were even worse. Her parents, who had once treated me politely if distantly, were furious. They had warned her not to overspend, not to push beyond what we could handle. Now they were on the hook for angry vendors and public embarrassment. From what I heard, they refused to bail her out. "You made this bed," her mother reportedly told her, "and now you'll lie in it." But the harshest blow wasn't from her parents or the guests. It came from the man she thought would step in. I found out through a mutual friend that Rachel had been texting someone else for weeks, a guy she'd met through a coworker. She painted me as the struggling fiancé who might not be able to deliver, and hinted that her life could look very different with someone who had ambition. She didn't leave me outright, but she kept him warm in the background, as if lining up a replacement in case I couldn't keep up with her vision. That plan crumbled the moment the wedding did. Once the flowers wilted and the bills came due, he backed away. No confrontation, no dramatic breakup. He just stopped answering. He wasn't interested in being part of a mess. Rachel was left with nothing but silence. In the weeks that followed, I kept my head down. I went to work, saved what I could, and started piecing my life back together. I didn't post about it, didn't send messages to mutual friends explaining my side. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of floating to the surface without my help. Meanwhile, Rachel's world seemed to shrink. Friends who used to flood her posts with comments went quiet. The same people she wanted to impress distanced themselves, not because they hated her, but because no one wants to be pulled into that kind of drama. Her social media shifted from pictures of gowns and table settings to vague quotes about fake people and being let down. I won't lie, there were nights I thought about her. Nights when I remembered the girl I met 3 years earlier, the one who laughed at my dumb jokes and held my hand when we couldn't afford more than a pizza on Friday night. I wondered when that woman had disappeared, or if she'd ever really been there at all. But then I'd remember her words. "Figure it out, Jason. I'm not your mother." And later, "Real men take care of their fiancés." She had turned my lowest point into ammunition. That wasn't love. That was leverage. So I stayed silent. Let her handle her own storm. She had always demanded I figure it out. Now it was her turn. A month after the wedding disaster, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. The message was short but dripping with bitterness. "You embarrassed me. You owe me for what you did. At least pay me back for half the wedding." I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone down. I didn't reply. She wasn't asking for closure. She was trying to pin her downfall on me, the same way she had pinned everything else. I thought about all the chances I'd given her, all the nights I had stayed up worrying while she scrolled through dresses and centerpieces. She had made her choices, and she had told me to figure it out. So I did, and the answer was that I didn't owe her anything. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's presence faded from my life. Mutual friends mentioned she wasn't the same, more quiet, more guarded. She kept posting on social media, but instead of pictures of rings or decorations, it was cryptic lines about betrayal and heartbreak. The comments were fewer now. The people who used to cheer her on didn't engage the way they once did. I didn't take joy in it, but I noticed it. She had built her identity around that one perfect day, the stage where she thought she'd shine brightest. When the day collapsed, the stage went with it, and there was nothing left for her to stand on. Meanwhile, my life became simple in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I worked. I saved. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the chaos. Weekends became quiet again, grabbing a beer, cooking at home, even just sleeping in without feeling the pressure of someone's endless demands. I wasn't bitter. If anything, I was relieved. Losing my job had been painful, but losing Rachel was the real turning point. It showed me what kind of partner she was, the kind who wanted to be carried when things got heavy, not the kind who would carry with me. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if she ever thought back to that night, when I asked her for help with the bills, and she told me coldly, "I'm not your mother." Did she realize the irony of it all? That in the end, she was the one who had to figure it out, alone, while the groom she tried to mold into her provider walked away without looking back. I don't know. And honestly, I don't need to. What I do know is that I finally understood something I should have seen earlier. A real partner doesn't measure your worth by how much money you can throw at a problem. A real partner stands with you when life strips things down to the basics. Rachel couldn't do that. And when her dream finally fell apart, she was forced to live out the very advice she had given me. Figure it out. I closed that chapter of my life quietly. No big speech, no dramatic ending. Just a man who realized that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. And in walking away, I found something I hadn't felt in months: peace. I appreciate you watching till the end. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more content.